Hello, my name is Sardar, and now I am going to make small presentation about Aral Sea. Okay, let's get started then. Okay, over the last several decades, environmental problems worldwide, different kind of problems such as pollution, ozone layer depletion, deforestation, desertification, global warming issues, climate change, all those problems became a discussion among a diverse layer of society. We do have all kind of global problems, global environmental problems in the 21st century. And most of those problems are caused by humankind. Now, I will draw your attention to one of the global environmental problem, the Aral Sea problem. Okay, let's get started. Several decades ago, Aral Sea was the world's largest lake, and geographically, it lies across the border of two neighbor countries, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Unfortunately, the Aral Sea is gone. In other words, I can say it diminished to a tenth of its former size now. We can say it's one of the most spectacular examples of humankind's destruction of nature. The United Nations Development Program also named the problem the most staggering disaster of the 21st century. Well, the history of Aral Sea. Well, Aral Sea in the 1950s was the number four largest lake on the earth with its 67,000 square kilometer territory, and it was especially rich in fish, and it was the supplier of one-sixth of the total fish that was consumed in the whole Soviet Union. Tourists used to come and visit the beach near the sea, and it had all kind of different fishes. Some catfish weighted up 100 kilograms, and sturgeon that weighted up to 80 kilograms. It had everything, every kind of fish. Its coastline shared by two neighboring countries, namely Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which were the part of the Soviet Union at that time. However, for decades now, the size of the Aral Sea has been dramatically reduced due to the Soviet era mismanagement, poor maintenance, and sustainable cotton cultivation, which began after 1960s. At that time, Soviet Union was the world's leading cotton producer, with over 70% coming from Uzbekistan. In 1960s, the Soviet Union picked Central Asia to work as its cotton supplier. Engineers prepared to use water of two rivers that feed Aral Sea. Those rivers were the Amur Darya and the Sir Darya. Those two rivers were diverted and mainly used for irrigation to reach this scale. But before, the water of those rivers used to flow to Aral Sea to feed the sea. In 1960, a 500-kilometer long channel was built in order to irrigate cotton fields, rice fields, taking one third of the river's water. In Central Asian countries, cotton had been grown before, but after Soviet Union, the scale saw a gradual increase. We can see this from the statistics also. For example, in 20 years' time, production quotas in Central Asian countries reached 9 million tons, which means making the world's fourth largest cotton producer at that time. Simultaneously, water level dropped 20 full meters, leaving the Moyna fishing fleet marooned and leaving the remaining seawater so salty that all the fish died. As I mentioned before, the Aral Sea is now one-tenth of size that it once was. The sand in the Aral Sea area is toxic, and it is going up to into the air and spreading across the entire atmosphere through the world. Most importantly, polluted drinking water affected local people's health, especially women and children. They experienced frightening levels of maternal, infant mortality rates, and different kinds of diseases. Local people around the Aral have a higher rate of cancer, tuberculosis, and anemia because of pesticides used in growing cotton. For example, child mortality rate peaked at 7.5%, and more than 50% of children died because of respiratory illnesses. It showed its effects. The loss of water in the sea brought different kind of continuous serious disasters for the whole region. Dust storms now form in what was once seabed, degrading soil till the chemicals for hundreds of kilometers. Biodiversity has diminished, and the region's entire climate system has become harder without a large mass of water. Besides this, change in the climate affects the lives of more than 4 million people who live near the sea because large capacity loss in terms of climate regulating brought extremely hot summers and super cold winters, which made this much difficult for the people to live in the area. It is also affected employment since it was pretty famous by its fishery in the region and around the sea. There used to be lots of fishing villages and people used to work as an angler. After the fishing was ruined and water loss in the Aral Sea led ships stranded in the salty sand desert. You can see the ships from my background also. Salt storms in the surrounding lands made farming impossible for the farmers in the area, since salt and dust started reaching up 200 kilometers and reduced agricultural productivity in the large farming areas of neighboring countries also. All those factors mentioned above result in a demographic imbalance of large migratory exodus to the other parts of the region. For example, more than 40,000 people left their homes around the Aral because of those problems. Then engineers in the 1980s noticed that only 10% of water flow reached to the sea compared to 1960s. But it was absolutely too late to do something, since large parts of the surface had already dried up, while the remaining part has been experiencing a speed up disappearance procedure. As a result, later in 1989, the Aral Sea has divided into two, the North Aral Sea and the South Aral Sea. Another hidden part of the problem was competition for water among neighboring countries. What I'm trying to say is the two feeder rivers mentioned above, the Amur Darya and the Sir Darya, were also used by neighboring countries, namely Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan, since the starting point of the rivers were in those countries and flow through those countries. For example, Amur Darya starts from Tajikistan and flows through Afghanistan and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan in order to reach the Aral Sea. However, the third area begins in Kyrgyzstan and flows through Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. All those countries were heavily dependent on the water since their economy was mainly based on agriculture, especially cotton production. Additionally, the poor political relationship among those countries made it impossible to work together against a common problem. The ecological community and basic necessities supported by the Aral Sea never returned to their original situation and be what they used to be 5 decades ago. However, we still have an opportunity and chance for recovery with proper attention to water resource management ecosystem health, human and energy needs, most importantly, the political will of several neighboring countries and third-party donor countries also. Now, I will share my several recommendations and suggestions to save the last parts of the Aral Sea, since much of it has already disappeared. Okay, firstly, to increase the water use efficiency in all five Central Asian countries, since it is very low in those countries, reaching 50-60%. In other words, I can say at least 40% of the water is lost due to the inefficient water used for irrigation. Therefore, those neighboring countries' responsibility is to create concrete and effective water use for irrigation to have enough water in upcoming years. For example, the Uzbek government has already started installing deep irrigation system in order to save more water, but it's not enough. Secondly, tree planting would be one of the best measures to stop sweeping sandstorms around the Aral Sea, since it is one of the best climate change solutions. The Green Great Wall project of China can be a classic example of how they changed the desert to wonderful man-made forests. Around the Aral region, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan are doing something similar to China by, by planting different plants in order to stabilize the climate. Still, it's not enough because of the limited budget the countries have to save the large parts of parts of the Aral Sea. It needs somehow global attention and the engagement of several communities, organizations, institutions, and other third-party donors. Well, in order to make the world better, in order to reduce all those environmental global problems, we have to work together. And I would like to tell to the all donor countries and organizations and several institutions to help to save the Aral. Since in order to make the world better, we have to work together. It doesn't mean that the problem outside our border is not belong to us. After several period of time, it affects to all of us. Let's save the Aral. Let's help for the good. Okay, that was my presentation. Thank you for your attention.